Oh, wow. What is it? Today's Friday. It's the 18th of October in 2019. Can you believe it? Only a few more months left. It's going to be 2020. Oh, well, yeah, the year's going by fast. The summer went by fast, and here we are again. Thank you for watching this video. My name is John Solano, if you don't know that already. And I guess you could say, a counselor, and I've been doing this counseling gig for about 30 years. And over the last decade, I'm going on 11 years now, I've been a family counselor and therapist working with high-risk families. Of course, I've worn many, many hats over the years and done many kinds of counseling. Uh, and So what these videos are about are really helping people like yourself see a little deeper into all sorts of different life circumstances, often circumstances that are very difficult to understand or traumatic or hurtful. And the way I do that more and more is that I often rely on wisdom teachings and I find those very helpful. My background educationally, if you will, is obviously in psychology. But I have specialized, if you will, or sought out more distinctly the path of transpersonal psychology, which includes all sorts of studies on different spiritual teachings and paths. And I myself have just really benefited from those powerful teachings. And so every day when I work with individuals and families, or when I lead groups, I managed to find a way to weave traditional psychology into more transpersonal psychology, or into kind of spiritual teachings. A lot of times people think that wisdom teachings or spiritual teachings are kind of really abstract and hard to understand, but actually they speak very deeply into the human experience. And it just sometimes takes someone maybe like myself who can again weave those wisdom teachings into some traditional psychology, and that helps, I guess you could say, ground them a little bit. It's like people can understand how they applied in day-to-day circumstances. And so one of the things that I wanted, that really came into my attention over the last week, of course, because I do work with people and families who are in high levels of conflict and tension. And oftentimes people who have experienced histories of trauma or multiple traumas. And so the people that I work with are in a lot of pain and suffering. And, it just doesn't seem sometimes that people get a break. And this includes me. This, part of why I'm doing this video is because of an awareness that I had in the last few days of how I was thinking that life is tough, and sometimes it just doesn't seem like you're getting a break. In fact, sometimes it seems like your life is cursed, and every day, again, like I said, I encounter people and families who feel very much the same way, exhausted, and they're just slugging through life. And it just seems when one problem starts to subside, another one comes up, and then another one, and another one, and it just keeps coming. And in those situations, of course, we all would feel a sense of exhaustion and confusion and futility. And naturally, we ask ourselves, why is this happening? That's a great part of our human existence, is that we want to make meaning of things. We want to know why things are happening. And especially when it seems like we're leading a good life, like we're good people, and we're, maybe even, dedicated to a spiritual discipline, and, we strive to live a clean life. And, we look at the rest of the world where there's some craziness going on, and we go, geez, I'm nothing like that, but why is it that I'm just not getting a break? Like I'm just, issue after issue, challenge after challenge. If it's not my finances, it's my physical health. If it's not that, it's something going on in my kid's school, or online bullying, or my marriage, or whatever it is. There's so many facets of life, and it just seems sometimes come in from all those different angles. And so as I was thinking about this in my own life and having a bit of those feelings, and what popped into my mind as I was saying to someone I was working with today who was feeling the same way, I said, what pops into my mind is the story of Job. Do you guys know the story of Job? Some of you might. It's a story from the Bible, from the Old Testament. And like I said, I use wisdom teachings a lot in my counseling and in my group work. And I share wisdom teachings from all different kinds of spiritual disciplines and wisdom, and mythology and all sorts of things. And I know sometimes people have challenges with different kinds of stories being told, whether they be Christian or Buddhist or Taoist or what have you. And people want to dismiss those stories because somehow they see them as religious or what have you. And this is not the discussion today to talk about the definition of religion and all this kind of stuff. But what I do say to my group members, especially because that's where I use a ton of wisdom teachings, is I say, when people are immature, the immature mind wants to dismiss wisdom immediately because the immature mind is self-centered and narcissistic. And so when people are self-centered and narcissistic, they want to think they know it all. And so any kind of wisdom teaching, especially one that is beyond their understanding, they immediately want to dismiss it. And so when I explain it in this way to parents, and this is in my parent leadership group, and everybody wants to be more mature and effective leaders, one of the things that I point out is that the immature mind, or what we would call immature, is a person who wants to dismiss something outright. Or it's somebody who says, oh, that's stupid, that I don't even understand that. See, if somebody truly doesn't understand something, the mature response to that would be curiosity and a step towards it. Oh, tell me more. Or a person would stick with it until they came to understand it. Wisdom teachings can sometimes be tough, and they're paradoxical. They're sometimes super simple stories, but they're so powerful and so deep. And I've been doing this for 30 plus years, like I mentioned. And so, and there are literally pieces of wisdom that I have reviewed hundreds of times. And I every time I review it, every time I go through it, it offers me something new. And that's one of the signs of really good wisdom teaching and mythology, is that it just blows your mind constantly. And the longer you stick with it, the more and more it reveals to you. And so again, I say, don't let names and labels and things like that bother you. Stick with the teaching here and see what it has to offer, because it is incredibly practical. Again, that's why I love the wisdom teachings, because they just cut to the chase. They pull no punches. Not like a lot of the information we get today, which just kind of pre-digested, instant gratification, kind of blowing smoke up, like the wisdom teachings can sometimes be disturbing. They can sometimes, it's like a double-edged sword. I mean, it stings sometimes, but the truth will set you free, and I'm a big believer in that. So I'm willing to stand in it and get stung a little bit if necessary. But it's a sting that we receive for our freedom, right? Again, the truth will set you free. So let's jump into this, and again, this is for all of you, or for those folks who might just be feeling like, oh my gosh, my life is cursed. I can't get a break here. It's just one thing after another. And so, just in quick summary, like the story of Job is about a guy who was really, an upstanding, upright guy. He really took a lot of care in making sure that he conducted his life with a lot of integrity. And he was well known for that. And considered, if you will, a godly man. And he was considered that even by God himself, right? So the story describes this. It starts with this setting, these circumstances, right? Again, Job is a man of integrity, a man of God, well known, and he was rich in property. He had a great family, big family, loving wife, great reputation, had all this stuff, considered a wealthy person. So considered blessed by God, right? And So here it is. One day, it says the story is that God and Satan were having a conversation, and Satan overhears God praising Job for being such an upright man of integrity and obedient person, etc., being a good man. And Satan says, "Oh, well, I think he's probably only good because you've blessed him so much." God goes, "No, that isn't the case, right? Test him." And so Satan goes about testing Job in the nastiest of ways, right? Job had 10 children. He kills them all, right? Uh, you know, just basically destroys his reputation and anything good, any wealth Job had, took away from him. His cattle, his livestock, things of that nature. And every time that happens to Job, like he never turns on God. He never, goes into playing victim against God and saying that God's got it out for me, etc. But he is wondering, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And so he remains steadfast. And as a final test, Satan inflicts him with these boils all over his body, physical ailment, physical pain. And this is what I was saying. A lot of folks, they feel like they can't get a break. I mean, it's like any property that you may have, a business you might have started, your wonderful children, and something tragic happens, and then a physical ailment, befalls you. And so it's just Job and his wife. And of course, Job is mourning, and he's in a tremendous amount of anguish, like a lot of us are when it just feels like our life is cursed. And, but Job will not, if you will, betray God. He will not blame God for the problem. Amidst all this pain and suffering, he still admires, he still praises God. And again, the only one left in his family is his wife. And even eventually his wife turns on him and says, this is, more or less, this is stupid of you to continue to praise God. You should, curse God essentially. And he goes, no, I'm not going to do that. So he maintains his integrity. And then after 7 days of mourning, he's got like 3 buddies that show up, right? And all of them are familiar, with the Bible or the Old Testament, and they're students, if you will. And so they're also questioning Job. Why did this happen? They're trying to help Job understand this. And pretty much all their advice, all their counsel, all their expressions were about maybe Job having committed some sins, or, he must have done something wrong in his life to get on God's bad side, or, all sorts of ideas that somehow he did something wrong, and he's paying the price now. And Job kept fighting off all this. In fact, he even got irritated with his friends and dismissed them and what they were trying to do in terms of convince him that somehow, that he was on God's bad side, that God had cast some sort of a curse on him, and he was victim to that. And he fought that off, right? And, and one more guy showed up and starts to go down the same route, and just blaming Job, that he wasn't a stand-up guy, that he, the reason, why he was so blessed is, because, he just, just didn't care about people, and didn't, he just kind of, had some sort of facade, some sort of deception going in the community, and Job fought that off and didn't believe it. And so at the end of the day, again, Satan and God, are talking, and obviously, Satan was not successful in getting Job to turn on God, and consequently, God blessed Job with twice as much of what he had before, a new family, wealth, etc., and he received God's blessing. Now, one of the things I didn't mention, because it just popped in my mind, one of the parts of the story is that is that there was a conversation, if you will, kind of between God and Job, and basically God told Job, is that you tried to figure this out on your own here, and you shouldn't have done that. And Job immediately understands that he is just a human being who can't understand God and what's happening, truly what's happening in life. And because of that humility that Job was willing to demonstrate at that time, that he was willing to be accountable for his arrogance, that he thought that he knew what was going on, or even made attempt to do it, because of the humility, the accountability and the humility that Job demonstrated, that God then was pleased with him and blessed him. And so, one of the things that I get out of the story and that I share with people is that when we experience trauma in life, it's an automatic response of our minds to try to figure out what the problem is, or what the source of our suffering is. That's not a bad thing. I mean, that's part of our human capacity. We want to make meaning of it. We want to know why this is happening the way that it is. Every family and everybody that I work with who's in agony comes to me with that question. It's like a big question mark that comes with them. It's like a mystery that they want solved. There's all sorts of suffering that they're experiencing, and it's probably ongoing and repetitive, happening for years and years, and they're just feeling so depleted and in so much anguish. And so people come in, and they want to know, why is this happening? But you know what happens? Is that as soon as they ask, why is this happening? John, please help me understand. Then they spend the next number of hours or days or sessions sharing with me what they think is the problem. And so most of the time, honestly, when people are in suffering, they don't really want the answer. They want to be affirmed in what they think they know. Now, the problem here is what they often think they know is, or makes them out to be a victim. Makes them out to be a victim. Why is that dangerous? You see, in the story, that's exactly what Satan was trying to do constantly, is force Job to turn on God, because God has been cursing him, has had it out for him. So God's the bad guy and Job is the poor victim. And whenever we go down the victim narrative, the victim path, there always has to be a victim and a victimizer. A victim and an oppressor dynamic show up. In other words, a schism occurs, a separation or divide. That's why the victim narrative is always divisive. There's an old saying, a divided house will fall. There's another saying, divide and conquer. I know you've heard this. This is an effective strategy to bring down anything, to bring down an army, to bring down a country, to bring down a couple, to bring down a family. Divide and conquer. And what divides people is this human tendency to want to apply our own knowledge. We think we know what the issue is. I work with this every day, where people will come in and say, yeah, something is clearly wrong here. Tell us what it is. And before I can even open my mouth, they're going to say, well, okay, here's what I think. I think if only, little Susie wasn't here, then things would be better. I think Susie's the problem. Just little Susie points over to, her mom, and she says, if only mom was gone, if mom would just leave, then everything would be better. And then dad says, but no, I think it's little Bobby over there. If he were gone, if it weren't for Bobby, everything would be better. And you see how everybody starts to divide. Everybody has their victim story. Everybody takes up a victim position. and then they start to launch attacks at one another. And the conclusion they always come to is that somebody's got to go. That's what happens when people run the victim narrative long enough. All it is divide, 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 divide. The blaming, the accusations, it's like a war zone. And ultimately, it sucks the life out of people. It sucks the life out of families. It sucks the life out of a marriage. And the only thing that can happen is the death of that connection, of that family, of that marriage, or what have you. This is what Satan was trying to seduce Job into, to become a victim. Because he knew if he could get him to turn on God, he would put distance between him and God. He would no longer trust God, and there would be a schism there. So divide and conquer. And then, once Job is separated from God, he can pick Job off, if that's what he wanted to do. So, the other thing, and most important thing, I think that this story illustrates, is that from the right perspective, from an elevated perspective, you can see something different going on. You see, kind of from an earthly position, if you will, from this horizontal position that we all live in. I mean, you saw Job's friends, you saw Job's wife, you saw even Job himself. They were all giving the wrong answer. It was basically that Job was rejected by God. Job was cursed by God. His life was cursed. In fact, he mentions that in the story. He feels cursed. He wished he was never born. He wished he would die. And what the story really says is that Job was not cursed at all. In fact, he was incredibly blessed and incredibly loved. Like God said, Job is just like one of my top students. Like, I love this guy like no other. And he loves me. And like there's this huge, wonderful love story between the two of them. And of course he was blessed. Like, that's the total opposite of what it felt like at ground zero. So when people feel so overwhelmed in what feels to be like an ongoing curse, the story says that is not true. Actually, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. But people can't see that from their current position. When we're being overwhelmed and it feels like those challenging circumstances are right in our face, it feels like we're cursed. It doesn't feel like we're blessed. That's the human interpretation of what's going on. And this is what I was saying earlier, is that people start to go into pain and suffering, and then all of a sudden the mind shows up and tries to give meaning to it, and usually in the form of a victim narrative. And the victim narrative doesn't say you're blessed. The victim narrative says you're cursed. You should have never been born. That's not true at all. But you have to have an elevated position. You have to be able to see it differently. And so, especially when people are part of families where trauma is shared, which is often the case with families that I work with, and easy to happen, right? Because the old saying, hurt people hurt people. So when someone has experienced trauma and it's been unaddressed and unhealed and they're running the victim narrative, et cetera, they're very likely to hurt other people. And so it's often common to see couples and families just like struggling so hard. Everybody's exhausted. Everybody's in survival mode. It's like everybody's fighting for their own life because they're all divided, because they all feel victimized. But somebody has to rise up and see this differently. Because no matter how good or right that victim narrative feels, It's kind of like a pacifier to a baby that's upset. You know, it's this basically what I often use the term cognitive pacifier. Knowledge can be that way sometimes. So somebody says, "Oh, now I know why my life looks like this because of so and so, because my parents did this, or because my wife did this, or my husband did this, or this." Yeah, and that happens to be a very tragic and victim story. Do you feel better? Well, not really, but at least I know now. And so there's a certain satisfaction that the psyche feels when it has assembled what appears to be a coherent narrative. But all it is, it's like a pacifier, like it's a cognitive kind of knowledge pacifier, or almost like a cognitive life raft that keeps the person from, keeps their kind of psychological head afloat so they don't drown in this. Drowned in what? Drowned in not knowing. But if a person really sees the kind of narrative that they've constructed and how nasty it is, they would want to give it up. Well, giving it up means standing in the unknown. Giving it up means that you weren't right. And you see, that's what God had to take away from Job. He says to Job, basically, you thought you knew. You went left, right, center, up and down trying to figure this out yourself. And you were wrong all those different directions. And so he has to get Job to admit that he didn't really know. And in that humility, that's where he received the blessing. So what I often ask of parents when I'm working with families who have been traumatized, or who have family members who have been traumatized and are stuck in a victim narrative, I say, you must be able to tell a different story. The way you combat a negative or toxic or victim tragic narrative is by bringing in a bigger, more true and inspiring narrative. So now that, in other words, instead of telling the victim narrative, tell a victory narrative. Go from victim to victor. You see, that's what the Job story offers here. It goes, you see, normal people, when they're faced with overwhelming circumstances, often take the temptation to go to the victim narrative. And as enticing as it can be, it's also very, very toxic and destructive. This is exactly what Satan wants to do. But it also offers a victorious narrative. It also offers a narrative that says, you're not cursed, you're blessed. That this whole thing is being orchestrated well beyond your understanding. Well beyond your small level of awareness and consciousness. I mean, that is a matter of fact, that we do not have a tremendous amount of consciousness as human beings. We would do well to increase our consciousness by 1%. That would be significant. But just to say that most of what goes on for us is well outside our consciousness. That's why we rely on wisdom teachings to help us understand this, to help us move from a victim narrative to a victorious narrative. Now, the victorious narrative, if you will, is the opposite, obviously, of the victim narrative, which is divisive. The victorious narrative is uniting, which, of course, is what we need right now at this time in society, when so many people are caught in victim narratives and things are becoming so divisive, and even, so people are physically assaulting each other out there in their competition for who's the biggest victim. This is what is going on. So again, as I was looking at my own life, but mostly as I'm looking at the lives of all the families that I work with and individuals, moms and dads who are just in so much agony and so much, sense of futility and despair. And everybody is suffering kind of from the same thing. Everybody is experiencing these challenging circumstances, but then the mistake they make is trying to decipher it, trying to answer the why question from their own perspective. It's like a dog chasing its tail. I mean, nothing can be solved there. And so encouraging parents to in whatever way you need to be the best leader possible is to really offer everybody an inspiring vision. That's how we become resilient. That's how we weather the storm. So I'm going to leave that here for now. There's so many of my other videos that could be connected to this to kind of deepen this understanding. But today I just really wanted to speak to all of us who at times feel overwhelmed, like you just can't get a break in life. Like if it isn't one thing, it's another. Right? And that's life, right? It just keeps coming. But I want to say that there are some positions you can take that can give you a more elevated, more victorious perspective on what's going on. And that will be enough to keep you and your family, right, resilient, hopeful, and more or less inoculated from some of the toxic and dangerous kinds of ideas and perspectives that are out there. All right? So thank you for listening today to today's message video. Please subscribe to the channel. Pass this video on to your friends. And let me know if there's any topics you would like to talk about. All right? So if I can't get another video out soon, have a great Halloween. And I'll talk at you later. Take care. Bye.